The great things about the internet are that it's too complex, too transnational, too decentralized, and frankly, too awesome for government bureaucrats and government's inherent inefficiency and stupidity to even begin to fathom, let alone efficiently regulate. With that said, it doesn't mean they will not try, and they will keep on trying, for liberty is not on the side of entropy. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. So, a couple of news stories in this episode to illustrate the point of liberty not being on the side of entropy but on the side of light. Now for further explanation on what that means, please see my October 2015 video called How Can Liberty Win? So, piece of news number one, coming from a highly partisan source, but the story is real. Armstrong Economics titles Austria wants to tax any search, like, or communication via internet. And goes like this, quote, Andreas Schieder is the parliamentary head of Austrian Chancellor Christian Kern's Social Democrats. He is a typical career politician since 1997 and the very type of person who has no idea about the world economy, no less human nature. He is a highly dangerous bureaucrat who only looks at people like cattle from which the government can extract greater and greater sums. Schieder is obviously a Marxist who wants to now tax human behavior and any interaction you have with Twitter Incorporated, Google or Facebook, among others. He wants to tax every time you do anything from searching, posting, tweeting or just liking someone's post. He claims this is really a barter transaction where it appears to be free, but you are giving them your personal data that they sell to advertising. That arrangement is a form of bartering, and any barter transactions is subject to the value-added tax, he said, according to Bloomberg. The business transaction that's going on here is that users are paying with their personal data, Schieder told journalists in Vienna. The business model of those internet companies is based on massive revenues that are generated with the help of those data. Andreas Schieder is a highly dangerous man. He only looks at what government can extract from people, never how government can reduce its size and cost to save money. It's always just raise more and more taxes without end. Now, this piece of news is relevant because it shows a sort of change. Now, leftists might call it an evolution even, in the way tyrants think of government in general and taxation in particular. I say it's rather a change, it's a change rather than an evolution, because this type of thinking is not exactly new. It's just that it's been out of the public sphere for a while now and, dare I say, out of fashion. Back in the 19th century Europe, and definitely for many of the previous centuries, taxation of barter was not uncommon at all. Not to mention that in many instances the government wouldn't even levy taxes in the form of currency in the monetary form, but quite literally take a percentage of the crops or cows or whatever they were taxing. Now, applying that to the internet raises several moral questions, especially the way this Austrian bureaucrat phrased it. And this is because governments already confiscate a significant chunk of the user's private data, especially the data of those users who think privacy is for idiots and tinfoil hat wearers and thus take no appropriate measure to secure their data. So not only the government is already confiscating the data, which is in itself immoral and in antithesis with what companies like Twitter do, who for better or worse ask for the user's consent every step of the way and don't just take whatever they can. Now, Facebook is a different deal. Those motherfuckers really do take everything. So not only is the government confiscating the data, but now wants to tax Austrians for the privilege of having their data confiscated and scooped by the spooks. Now isn't that wonderful? Now, of course, there is an argument to be made that the Austrian government doesn't have a surveillance program that can even begin to compare with the program that Iran has or the programs of the Irans of Europe, namely Germany and the United Kingdom, and we'll talk about the United Kingdom in a minute. But still, the Austrian government routinely consents, usually tacitly but sometimes overtly, to various scoops by various agencies, including the United States NSA. Because, you see, the NSA only has a legal difficulty when it spies on Americans. Spying everyone else, on the other hand, is honky-dory. Now, will this initiative of this Austrian bureaucrat succeed? I don't know. Probably not, because implementation is a total nightmare, and that's me being charitable. It simply cannot be done. But just because it cannot be done, it doesn't mean it isn't cancer. These kinds of things are constantly being tried by governments and need to be fought every single time. The government needs to win once. We need to win every single time. We can't, and indeed we shouldn't, rely on the principle that the internet will always find a workaround. Yes, most of the times workarounds to idiotic government policies are made available, but that doesn't mean the said idiotic policies are suddenly okay. Now, speaking of idiotic policies, the second story is cut from the same miserable cloth, and I'll read it from another highly partisan source, this time from the far left. The Independent titles, Theresa May to create new internet that will be controlled and regulated by government. And goes like this, quote, Theresa May is planning to introduce huge regulations on the way the internet works, allowing the government to decide what is said online. Particular focus has been drawn to the end of the manifesto, which makes clear that the Tories want to introduce huge changes to the way the internet works. Some people say that it is not for the government to regulate when it comes to technology and the internet, it states. We disagree. Senior Tories confirmed to BuzzFeed News that the phrasing indicates that the government intends to introduce huge restrictions on what people can post, share and publish online. The plans will allow Britain to become, quote, the global leader in the regulation of the use of personal data and the internet, close quote, the manifesto claims. It comes just soon after the Investigatory Powers Act came into law. That legislation allowed the government to force internet companies to keep records on their customers' browsing histories, as well as giving ministers the power to break apps like WhatsApp so that messages can be read. The manifesto makes reference to those increased powers, saying that the government will work even harder to ensure there is no, quote, safe space for terrorists to be able to communicate online, close quote. That is apparently a reference in part to its work to encourage technology companies to build backdoors into their encrypted messaging services, which gives the government the ability to read terrorists' messages, but also weakens the security of everyone else's messages, technology companies have warned. The government now appears to be launching a similarly radical change in the way that social networks and internet companies work. While much of the internet is currently controlled by private businesses like Google and Facebook, Theresa May intends to allow government to decide what is and isn't published, the manifesto suggests. The new rules would include laws that make it harder than ever to access pornographic and other websites. The government will be able to place restrictions on seeing adult content, and any exceptions would have to be justified to ministers, the manifesto suggests. The manifesto even suggests that the government might stop search engines like Google from directing people to pornographic websites. Quote, we will put a responsibility on industry not to direct users, even unintentionally, to hate speech, pornography or other sources of harm, the conservatives write. The laws would also force technology companies to delete anything that a person posted when they were under 18. But perhaps most unusually, they would be forced to help controversial government schemes like its Prevent strategy by promoting counter-extremist narratives. In harnessing the digital revolution, we must take steps to protect the vulnerable and give people confidence to use the internet without fear of abuse, criminality, or exposure to horrific content, the manifesto claims in a section called The Safest Place to Be Online. The plans are in keeping with the Tories' commitment that the online world must be regulated as strongly as the offline one, and that the same rules should apply in both. Our starting point is that the online rules should reflect those that govern our lives offline. The Conservatives' manifesto says, explaining this justification for a new level of regulation. It should be as unacceptable to bully online as it is in the playground, as difficult to groom a young child on the internet as it is in the community, as hard for children to access violent and degrading pornography online as it is in the high street, and as difficult to commit a crime digitally as it is physically. Oh no! Will someone think of the children? Amazing. Back to the article. The manifesto also proposes that internet companies will have to pay a levy like the one currently paid by gambling firms. Just like with gambling, that money will be used to pay for advertising schemes to tell people about the dangers of the internet. In particular, being used to support awareness and preventative activity to counter internet harms, according to the manifesto. The Conservatives will also seek to regulate the kind of news that is posted online and how companies are paid for it. If elected, Theresa May will, quote, take steps to protect the reliability and objectivity of information that is essential to our democracy, close quote, and crack down on Facebook and Google to ensure that news companies get enough advertising money. If internet companies refuse to comply with the rulings and suggestions that some have already made about the powers in the Investigatory Powers Act, then there will be a strict and strong set of ways to punishment. We will introduce a sanctions regime to ensure compliance, giving regulators the ability to fine or prosecute those companies that fail in their legal duties, and to order the removal of content where it clearly breaches UK law, the manifesto reads. In laying out its plan for increased regulation, the Tories anticipate and reject potential criticism that such rules could put people at risk. While we cannot create this framework alone, it is for government, not private companies, to protect the security of people and ensure the fairness of the rules by which people and businesses abide, the document reads, nor do we agree that the risks of such an approach outweigh the potential benefits, close quote. Okay, so, in a nutshell, this is really bad. And I read it in its entirety because this kind of language is all too familiar. The hysterical coverage offered to the issue by The Independent is somewhat warranted, but it is also insincere. Where was The Independent when Germany was doing the exact same thing? Almost to the T, really. When that happened, The Independent lauded the measures because right-wing hate speech needs to be shut down, you see. But now, because there is a T standing for Tory next to the ones proposing the exact same thing in Britain, suddenly The Independent found a spine because they're big partisans of the Labour Party, which I still don't know why it hasn't changed its name to something more honest, like the Revolutionary Marxist-Leninist Party, or something to that effect. Sadly, though, this is to be expected, from Theresa May in particular. I mean, I remember criticizing her back in 2013 in one of my podcasts, long before the possibility of her being the Prime Minister was around. And I criticized her then for an almost identical idea. Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn agree on two issues: harsh opposition to freedom of expression and unwavering support for the demented totalitarian ideology of feminism. And to make things worse, opposition to free speech is a way of life for the British political class and for the British deep state. Older subscribers might remember the 2016 videos that I made about Britain's one-way street to totalitarianism, to an extent unimaginable outside dictatorships like Iran and China, and more recently, Germany. Now, with all of that being said, this is indeed a really dangerous development precisely because there is little hope to change it or stop it over the short run. Over the long run, either the market or the next generation of politicians will change it, whichever comes first, and my bet is on the market, though. But over the short run, this is indeed unstoppable. Well, almost unstoppable. The Tories will win the election. I'll be in Sweden when the votes will be cast, but I have little to no doubt that the Tories will win. The only debate is whether they'll win in a huge landslide or they'll just have a normal victory like they did in 2015. Now this kind of thing is demanded by the British deep state and or the GCHQ. Voting Labour, however, won't help. They might not put it in the manifesto because it would be politically unwise for them to do so, as the party is in dire straits, but they would do it anyway. How do I know? Well, because when the vote in the Commons on the Investigatory Powers Act happened, which is by far the most radical anti-privacy bill in the whole history of the Western world, Labour either abstained or voted for certain sections of it, such as giving the state the power to collect data in bulk from everyone, essentially making everyone a suspect of terrorism. When asked why did they abstain, considering that if they had voted against, the bill would have failed, they made excuses for it. The PC Mag was noting back in December, quote, Labour's voting was consistent with plans unveiled by Shadow Home Secretary Andy Burnham back in March. In his words, to actively vote against the bill would be to shrink Labour's duty as the official party of opposition. The simple fact is that Britain needs a new law in this area. Outright opposition, which some are proposing tonight, risks sinking the bill and leaving the interim laws in place, unquote. Now that was a lie. The interim laws that he's talking about had a sunshine clause, meaning that they would have expired automatically at the end of 2016. So no, voting Labour will not help. Alright, but why do I bring up all of these? Well, it's because I see too many YouTubers and authors who act as if they're shocked when reading this piece of news. And the point I'm trying to make is that you shouldn't be shocked, but rather prepared. I've seen several articles debating the party politics of this or blaming it on SJWs. None of that matters, folks. When the deep state wants something, most of the time it gets it. And remember, I was speaking about the deep state long before the cool kids on the block even learned the term. This is the issue. The SJWs will most likely be used as the useful idiots to expand this. So will the religious right, for that matter, especially on pornography, which is the meeting point between the religious left and the religious right. And then, once they get that passed, watch as everything becomes pornography in the same fashion that everything is sexist for feminists. This has happened already in Britain. There is a statute somewhere that mandates companies to automatically filter out quote-unquote adult websites unless the user specifically asks not to. The statute was extended to now mean that you have to sign up on a government-sanctioned list that you want unfiltered internet, and you may be denied presence on that list under certain conditions. Now, isn't Britain great? I really don't understand people who want to immigrate there. I really don't. Unless I were paid at least £5 million a year after taxes, the prospect of staying in Britain for more than a few days in a visit strikes me as absurd. But then again, I'm an extremist, so there's that. Anyway, the point is that the blocking of adult sites ended up blocking websites about prostate cancer, websites about breast cancer, feminist websites, MRA websites such as thevoicefromen.com, which to the best of my knowledge is still blocked on O2 Mobile, and many other websites that cannot possibly be construed as being adult websites the way you and I understand the term. If you think this won't happen with these powers, you are of course deeply mistaken. Alright, so I said that this thing is almost unstoppable. Well, the almost part comes because there are a few things that you could do if you live in Britain, but none of them are easy. As I said in other videos, conservatives in every country of Europe should strive to create their own networks of people and aim to have their own schools, like the leftists do, and I routinely give the example of Common Purpose, which is a left-wing secretive society busy schooling future deep state agents. Now this is a long shot, but right-wingers need to start building that right about, now. It's not going to be easy, and it won't yield results tomorrow, but it will change everything for the better in 10 to 15 years. Delayed gratification, folks. Delayed gratification. Another thing that you can, and indeed must do, is make noise to your local politician. And when I say noise, I mean real noise. Turn up with a protest of 500 people to his or her office. Write letters, write binding petitions, and over the next year in particular, because if the Tories will try to implement this, they won't do it this year for sure. So over the next year, stage a few mass protests. Be pragmatic about it. Team up with anyone that agrees with you on this issue. And this is something that I'll have to do a video about at some point. Pair policy alliance is something that needs to be done more often. The Christians and the hardline feminists, for instance, teamed up to file court papers against the transgenderist insanity. Good! We need to see that happening more often on other policies as well. Strictly on this issue, don't be shy to team up with anyone, but especially with the virulent ones. The hardline anonymous people, those that can command the crowds, not the virgin keyboard warriors. Those are useless people, both for this issue and in general. But the hardliners, those that can bring big crowds, yeah, those can be useful for these things. They don't like the policy because it comes from the Tories or because they believe corporations are ipso facto bad. So what? Can they mobilize 300 people to picket the office of an MP? If yes, then they're useful. The final thing that you should do is be prepared for the worst. If you don't know already, learn about privacy. Learn about virtual private networks or VPNs. Learn about private browsing. Get into the habit of keeping certain things offline. In other words, be conservative with technology. Privacy is also a natural right. So it is your individual responsibility first and foremost to safeguard it. You have as much privacy as you allow yourself to have. Sure, governments suck, but they can suck from you a lot less if you take some steps to secure your privacy than if you don't do anything. The anti-privacy crowd likes to recite the mantra that, oh, there is no privacy on the internet, but that's a gross misrepresentation of the point. Yes, nothing is perfect, so there is no 100% privacy and there can be no such thing, but that doesn't mean you should allow the status quo, which is 0% privacy, just because you can't reach 100%. Look, I wish I had a more positive message, but practical politics ain't easy, nor is it always positive. You can make it happier, though, by fighting with a sense of humor and a high morale, which you absolutely should strive for. But in the end, practical politics is still war, and you go to war with the army you have and not the one you hope to have. And war is merely an extension of diplomacy. That's why you should prepare for the worst, because you might not need the worst, but it's damn good if you were ready. There's even a Latin proverb or adage, if you want, for that. Si vis pacem para bellum, or as I like to say, only the paranoid survive. Liberty is not a given. Liberty needs to be defended every single day. It's just like dust. You always have to clean the dust, which is tyranny and socialism in our analogy, because if you don't, you'll be buried in dust. Civilization is the exception, not the norm. That's why it needs to be defended. And with all of that being said, thank you for watching, thank you for your generous and continuous support, and I'll see you soon on Freedom Alternative.